Have you ever felt that humanity has forgotten how to be human? It seems like a heavy question, perhaps even an exaggeration at first glance, but think about it. Amidst so much technology, so many digital connections, why are we increasingly disconnected from one another? Have you noticed how superficial conversations are, how rushed meetings are, and how empathy has become almost a luxury item? We're always surrounded by people, and yet many of us feel profoundly alone. Have you ever been through this? People are talking too much and listening too little. Touching has become rare. The present gaze is almost non-existent. We live in an age where knowing a lot isn't the same as understanding it completely. We have access to tons of information, but we seem to be forgetting what truly makes us human: the ability to feel others, to connect beyond words, to recognize what's alive behind what's said. And this is exactly where Alan Watts' wisdom comes in. You may have heard of him, a British philosopher, author, and one of the greatest bridges between Eastern and Western thought. But what many don't realize is how his teachings on consciousness, presence, and the ego have everything to do with social intelligence, and more, how they can be the key to rescuing something we've been letting slip away: the art of simply human being. The fundamental problem is not technological, it is human. This quote from Watts is more relevant than ever, because the real crisis we face today isn't in machines, algorithms, or the speed of networks. It's in the way we relate, or fail to relate, to others. It's in the rush with which we jump from one notification to the next, without time to truly listen. It's in the fear of showing vulnerability, in the constant drive to appear invincible. And it's funny how the more we try to appear strong, the further we move away from our true strength: genuine connection. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. Perhaps you realize that many of your daily anxieties, that feeling of being lost in the middle of everything, that frustration trying to be understood, that restlessness that haunts you even on seemingly good days, come not from the world itself, but from the way we've been taught to interact with it. And maybe, just maybe, Alan Watts will help you see all of this in a new light, because the real motivation, it doesn't just come from goals, productivity, or ambition. Sometimes it's born when we look at someone and finally see a human being there, and when we allow them to see us that way too. But after all, what exactly did Alan Watts say about this? And how can his ideas help us rescue this social intelligence that seems to have been forgotten over time? That's what we're going to talk about now. Alan Watts used to say that human beings are not isolated entities, lost inside a bag of skin, but rather expressions of the universe itself. And when we truly understand this, even the way we look at strangers on the street begins to change, because we realize that those people also feel fear, also have doubts, also carry invisible scars. But how many times a day do we allow ourselves to see others this way? How often are we so immersed in our own internal noise, so busy trying to appear successful, righteous, or strong, that we neglect the simple act of being present with someone? For real, it is at this point that social intelligence, that essential yet neglected skill, reveals itself not as a technique or an academic concept, but as a return to our own nature. It lies in listening without judgment, in the silence that welcomes, in the laughter that needs no proof, in the pause between one response and the next, in the "I understand you" that comes without words. And the most interesting thing is that by cultivating this kind of presence, we not only improve our relationships, but also awaken something within us, something that was there all along but perhaps forgotten: our deepest humanity. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, if this content resonates with you in any way, subscribe to the channel right now. Here, every week, we delve into ideas like these, which not only inspire, but help transform the way you relate to the world, others, and yourself. And that's it, because what comes next may make you completely rethink the way you view your ego, conflicts, and even that constant feeling of being disconnected from the world. Because when we talk about social intelligence, we're referring to something far beyond friendliness or communication skills. It's a forgotten form of wisdom, perhaps the most essential, that of perceiving the other not as an obstacle, a threat, or an instrument, but as someone as real as ourselves. Alan Watts saw this clearly. For him, life was more than achieving goals or playing social roles. It was about being aware of the dance of existence, the intertwining of self and other. And it's curious how this idea, which should be obvious, has become increasingly distant from modern reality. Today, we live in the information age. We have instant access to everything: news, data, opinions. We can talk to anyone in the world in seconds, but at the same time, we are losing the simplest and most profound ability, the ability to talk with presence, real conversation, no distractions, no rush to respond, no trying to outdo the other person, just being there, whole. And perhaps that's precisely why we feel so fragmented, because the speed at which we live comes at a price, and the cost is quality of our connections. When everything is immediate, everything also becomes superficial. We lose the time for looking, for silence, for understanding, and we begin to live in a state of emotional urgency, as if listening to the other were a delay. This is where the subtle but decisive role of the ego comes in. The ego, that image we try to protect at all costs, feeds on separation. It wants to be right. It wants to win debates. It wants to control the course of conversations. And often, this is precisely what prevents communication from being a genuine encounter. The ego turns dialogues into arguments, and what could be a bridge becomes a wall. Alan Watts said, "You are not something inside a bag of skin. You are the entire universe." This phrase may seem too poetic at first glance, but there is a hidden truth in it that can cause a radical transformation in the way we see others and ourselves. When we begin to understand that we are not separate entities but manifestations of the same living reality, the way we relate to each other changes completely. Judgment diminishes, listening deepens, empathy ceases to be an effort and becomes natural. It's as if social intelligence isn't something to be learned, but something to be remembered. And in this process of remembering, active listening plays a crucial role, because listening, really listening, is one of the most revolutionary acts we can practice today, and it's also one of the rarest. Listening isn't just staying silent while someone else speaks. It's being silent within. It's suspending the need to correct, interrupt, or argue. It's being there with the other person as if holding something fragile and precious. It's understanding that often people just need to be seen before they can be understood. Have you ever stopped to think about how many conversations you've had that could have changed something? If you had actually listened. Maybe a friend who just needed to be embraced. Maybe a relative who never had the space to express their feelings. Or even you, who in so many situations just wanted to be heard, not fixed. Listening is, as Watts said, a form of love without words. And in this sense, listening is an act of courage, because it requires us to step outside of our center, to stop trying to control the narrative, to accept that we don't have all the answers. And when that happens, something opens up. Because being with someone truly present, attendant, attentive, available, is a transformative experience. It heals wounds that don't show up on scans. It restores bonds that seemed lost, and it reveals a dimension of humanity that goes beyond any pretty talk. The Eastern traditions, which Alan Watts studied so deeply, have always valued this silent presence. Zen, for example, teaches not with words but with attention. Meditation, tea, walking, all are invitations to be whole, here and now. And this also applies to the way we relate to one another. When we are present, even the simplest gesture, like looking someone in the eye or listening to a conversation without judgment, can become a sacred moment. But we live in a culture where presence has become the exception, where everything demands performance, rapid response, and control, where even spirituality sometimes becomes just another item in the rush cart. And so, reclaiming presence has become almost an act of resistance. Resist distraction, resist noise, resist the idea that only what's fast, productive, and efficient matters. Watts invited us to play a different game. The game of life is flow, where no one needs to prove anything, where there are no winners or losers, only participants aware that everything is part of the whole. And in this game, presence is the invisible rule that changes everything. But what really stops us from entering this more human, more conscious, more integrated state? Perhaps the biggest obstacle is the competitive ego, the one that thrives on comparisons, social masks, and the desire to be more or better than others. This one makes us forget that we're all in the same ocean, even if we're on different waves. And this isn't just a pretty metaphor. It's a truth that, when understood, can dissolve old resentments, meaningless disputes, and even loneliness. Because when we see ourselves as part of the same movement, there's no longer a need to win, just to flow along. So, the next time someone talks to you, stop. Look, listen, not as someone waiting for their turn to respond, but as someone who understands the value of presence. Because every conversation is a chance for healing, every word is an invitation to reconnect, and every encounter can be the beginning of a silent but profound change. Because when we begin to see our relationships not as utilitarian exchanges, but as mirrors of our own consciousness, everything changes. Alan Watts spoke about this with a clarity that was both calming and unsettling. He said that every person we meet is in some way an extension of ourselves, and that the way we react to others reveals more about our internal state than about the other person themselves. Think about it. How many times have you been irritated with someone and after a while realized that person was just awakening something that already existed within you? Perhaps an old pain, an unspoken expectation, an unresolved insecurity. What we call conflict is often just the collision of two egos trying to survive, each in its own way trying to be seen, recognized, respected. But the ego doesn't want to be healed. It wants to win. That's why most interactions today are marked by tension, not because we hate each other, but because we're constantly on alert, trying to protect a fragile self-image, an image built over years, shaped by trauma, comparisons, and the constant need for approval. Watts used to say that this self-image is a functional illusion. It serves to navigate the world, but it doesn't define who we are. The problem begins when we confuse image with essence, and at that point, social intelligence loses its power, because we stop seeing the other as real and begin to see them as a threat to our constructed identity. And then comes the silent disconnect. We are connected to everything, the internet, networks, notifications, but increasingly distant from ourselves. We spend hours scrolling, consuming ideas, absorbing opinions. But when we close our phones, how many of us feel truly seen? How many have someone to talk to without fear of judgment? How many live relationships where they can simply exist without having to act? This is a painful question, because it reveals a void we try to fill in every way, with productivity, with distractions, with fleeting relationships. But deep down, what's really missing is that human space. Space to be imperfect, space to not know, space to feel. And this space doesn't appear by chance. It is created, it is cultivated. It arises when someone consciously decides to step out of autopilot mode, when someone chooses to listen more than talk, when in a conversation, the priority isn't winning the argument, but understanding the pain behind it, when the focus shifts from ego to connection. And this, although it seems small, has a gigantic impact, because everything that truly transforms our journey comes from these simple yet profound experiences. A hug that holds more than 1,000 pieces of advice, a silence that allows the other to breathe, a look that says, "I see you." Can you remember a time when someone did that for you? Maybe it was a teacher, a friend, even a stranger, someone who, for a few moments, made you feel whole, even without saying much. These are the marks that remain, because deep down, that's what we need. Not more answers, but more presence. And here comes another central point of Alan Watts's thinking: presence as a form of truth. For him, living in the now wasn't just a philosophical concept, it was a real, accessible, everyday practice. When we are present, we stop reacting impulsively. We begin to act consciously. Anger dissolves before it turns into aggression. Anxiety softens before it turns into despair. Listening deepens before the other person needs to scream for attention. This presence is so powerful that it often heals what we didn't even know was broken. And the most curious thing, it doesn't require grand rituals or difficult words. It just requires you to be there, whole. But if it's so simple, why is it so rare? The answer, once again, lies in the ego. It fears vulnerability. It wants control. It wants to know what comes next. It dreads the "I don't know." And presence is precisely the opposite of that. It demands surrender. It demands trust. It demands that we let go of certainties and embrace the moment. That's why so many people run away from the present. Because being present is, in a way, being naked before life. No masks, no shields, just you, feeling everything, no filters. And yet, it is in this space that the best things happen, because it is there that truth appears. The other person's truth, yours, the truth of life as it is, without embellishment. And when this truth comes to light, something reorganizes inside. You no longer need to pretend. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to compete. You just have to be. And that's precisely where the transformation not a forced transformation with quick promises or magic formulas, but a silent, almost invisible transformation that begins with the way you begin to relate to everything around you, with more kindness, with more empathy, with more awareness, because deep down, every external change begins within. It begins with how we choose to look at others and ourselves. It begins when we stop rushing and start listening. It begins when, even in the midst of chaos, we choose to be present. And Alan Watts has been saying all this for decades, but perhaps only now is the world ready to listen. And listening, as we have seen, is loving in silence. Now, what if all this we're talking about is just the surface? What if behind these ideas lies something deeper, more revealing, more transformative, something that can radically change the way you live and connect? Because if there really is a source to this disconnection we feel, this constant feeling of being surrounded by people yet still isolated, it might be rooted in a subtle detail that almost no one notices, the way we identify with our mind. Alan Watts, with his calm voice and brilliant analogies, explained that human suffering comes not so much from external circumstances, but from the way we think about those circumstances, and more than that, from the illusion that we are our thoughts. He said, "You're not thinking your thoughts, they're happening to you." This may seem strange, even uncomfortable. After all, from a young age, we learn to trust our minds as tools of control, security, and identity. But if we stop and look more closely, we realize that many of the social and emotional conflicts we experience arise precisely from this blind identification with the ideas that pass through our heads. That's the way I am. This person irritates me. I'm right. He's wrong. When we believe these phrases define who we are, we start to defend ideas as if they were parts of our body. And of course, any disagreement becomes a personal threat. This leads to confrontations, tension, and difficulty listening to others, because we stop seeing ideas as something fluid and start treating them as fortresses to be protected. But what if, as Watts said, thought were just a flow, a mental current that needn't be stopped or obeyed? What if you didn't have to fight your thoughts, nor cling to them, but just observe them, like watching clouds pass by in the sky? This perspective changes everything, because it takes the weight off immediate reaction. It creates space between stimulus and response, and it is in this space that true emotional intelligence, a direct cousin of social intelligence, because without self-awareness, there is no possible connection with others, only projections, only defenses, only masks. And when two masks talk, no one really meets. Watts invites us to remove these masks, not with effort, but with awareness. He teaches us that we can look at the ego without condemnation, simply by recognizing that it is part of our experience, but not the totality of who we are. Just as an actor's role doesn't define their real life, the social roles we assume don't define our essence either. And it is in this essence that true connection happens. Not in the idealized self, but in the real self, vulnerable, imperfect, alive. This real you is what expresses itself when you listen to someone with genuine attention, when you withhold judgment, when you allow the other person to exist as they are, without needing to fit them into a preconceived notion. And the most magical thing about all this is that, by allowing the other person to exist, you gradually begin to allow yourself to exist as well. It's as if the other person's presence acts as a mirror, and for a brief moment you see yourself more clearly, not through the filter of your ego, but through the reflection of shared reality. That's the beauty of true empathy. It's not something we learn from technical books or public speaking courses. It's something that emerges naturally when we slow down our thinking, abandon the need to win, and open ourselves to feeling. Therefore, social intelligence can't be measured by diplomas, followers, or ready-made self-help phrases. It reveals itself behind the scenes in small interactions, in the tone of voice, the response time, the respect for silence, in the way you treat a stranger, in your ability to say "I don't know" honestly. It's a quality of presence that even transforms the environment. Have you ever been in a room where someone walked in and, without saying a word, changed the atmosphere? Not because of power, not because of status, but because of awareness. Alan Watts called this tuning into the moment. Like music, you can try to play alone fast, out of time, But when you allow yourself to hear the other instruments, you feel the rhythm of life and find harmony. Conversation flows, eyes meet, touch makes sense. And perhaps this is the great secret hidden. Behind social intelligence, it is not a technique. It is a state of being. And when you're in this state, the other person feels it. They feel safe. They feel trust. They feel free. Because they know they're not being measured, judged, or manipulated. They're being seen. And being seen these days is one of the rarest and most healing experiences there is. That's why listening heals, presence heals, empathy heals, and curiously, most of these healings happen without us even realizing it, because they don't come with fanfare. They don't appear in posts or speeches. They manifest themselves in the details, in the good morning that came with a genuine smile, in the how are you that came not out of politeness, but out of genuine interest. These are the little ones' revelations that build the great transformation. And here's an invitation to reflect. How many of these healings have you provided, even without knowing it? How many times have you been that silent presence that helped someone breathe deeper, feel less alone? Maybe more often than you think. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this conversation truly resonated with you. And that, to me, says a lot. Maybe it was a reminder, a turning point, or just that silent confirmation that you're not alone in this quest for more connection, more truth, more presence. If this content brought you clarity, comfort, or simply a new perspective, subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring reflections that, more than just informing, help realign what truly matters. And it's always a pleasure to have you here, building this together with me. Oh, and comment there. I'm with you until the end. Just so I know you felt this message until the very last second. It's beautiful when we realize there are more people on the same wavelength. If you'd like, leave a like too. This shows that it's worth continuing to create this type of content with calm, depth, and truth. And look, there's a video right here that really complements what we talked about today. Click and continue with me there. The conversation isn't over yet.